Do you love playing the violin, but find you struggle with pain or discomfort if you play or practice for too long? Well, maybe you should stop being such a wimp. Actually, that's terrible advice. But here is some much better advice for how to overcome playing discomfort and avoid playing injuries. I'm Tobiah Murphy, and this is Murphy Music Academy. So, for those of you who are subscribed to the channel, you know what I'm about to do. For those of you who don't know what I'm about to do, hit that subscribe button and fix that right now. Okay, so one of the best ways that you can make sure you're not doing anything wrong while you're learning to play the violin is, of course, to get with a knowledgeable private teacher. Now that a lot of us are forced to be taking our lessons online, people like myself are now teaching online. So if you are interested in having a Skype session with me or starting Skype lessons with me, first lesson is free, by the way, my contact information will be in the description below. And of course, go ahead and like the video if you like the video. And if you want to say something to me, put it in the comments below because I will reply to your comments so long as they are cogent. If you've been playing the violin for some of you, not even for that long, you've probably begun to feel that, playing the violin is not the most comfortable thing. And for some of you, it may have started to even change from general discomfort to actual pain. Now, some of this discomfort is legitimate. For instance, if you were to start running or exercising or do any physical activity, it is going to put certain requirements on you that, for a little while at least, are going to feel uncomfortable because they are putting you outside of what your body is used to doing. And that's okay. We want to stretch ourselves to get better. For instance, let's say I could deadlift 405 pounds. I can't. I used to be able to, but I can't anymore. But let's say I still could. If I wanted to get to 420 pounds, I would have to put myself through a concerted effort that for at least short periods would provide a certain amount of discomfort, and maybe in the recovery period after those workouts to build up to the next 15 or so pounds would also give me a certain amount of discomfort. However, that is a different type of discomfort. That is a constructive discomfort, as opposed to if I deadlifted 300 pounds with the wrong form and threw my back out. Now that is not what we're going for. So even in violin, we have to be able to differentiate the difference between maybe stretching things in a way they're not used to and playing with pain that is actually going to cause you literal injuries like tendinitis or carpal tunnel. Also, if you are currently struggling with serious pain, what I'm talking about today is going to be preventative measures, things that from here on out you should try to do to avoid pain, or maybe if you're in just sort of mild discomfort, it could help alleviate that. If you're having serious problems with pain while playing, then please go see a therapist, a chiropractor, or a doctor, get some professional help. Also, this video is not going to be about various stretches or exercises that you can do outside of the violin to help alleviate or to prevent playing injuries or pain. What I want to talk about is your actual technique, how you are using muscles either in a wrong way or a right way that will either hurt or help you in terms of avoiding playing injuries and pain. So when it comes to violin playing, there are two areas of your body where you are primarily at risk for getting playing injuries, things like pinched nerves, tendinitis, and of course, carpal tunnel. So those two places are your trapezius muscle, which is this giant muscle on your back that goes from your shoulder up to your neck to your other shoulder and down the middle of your back. You can see a picture of it right there. The other place, of course, being your forearm, which of course are really the muscles that move all your fingers, as you can see. Look at it wiggle. Now I want to start out with the trapezius muscle because not only is it the primary locus of pain, but is also responsible for a lot of really shoddy violin technique. Now to understand why the trapezius muscle causes us so many problems, we have to understand first what the trapezius muscle does. And what it primarily does is this. No, not that I don't know, it's literally this. Shrugs. Of course, the more astute among you can probably understand why this would be a problem, and why it would be so easy to develop muscle knots, tension, and pinched nerves in this muscle because, well, we hold the violin at least a little bit here. It's at least supported here, and it's very easy for people to raise the shoulder to keep the violin in place, causing, even if it's just a little bit of raising, constant tension throughout all of here. Now imagine you are practicing with that constant tension several hours a day for several years, and you'll understand why so many young violinists suffer from playing injuries. So the technical solution to this is to learn to play with what I would call a quiet trapezius muscle, one where your shrugging muscle isn't constantly active in order to help you hold the violin up. This means that instead of holding the violin mostly with the chin in the neck, you need to learn, and it doesn't matter whether you use a shoulder rest or not, but if you do use a shoulder rest, this is more important for you because if you don't use one, you're kind of forced into playing this way, is you need to learn to hold the violin primarily in your left hand. Holding the violin primarily in your left hand alleviates much of the responsibility of supporting the instrument from these muscles to the muscles in your upper arm, which are much more suited to holding things in that manner. And if you're wondering, well, how do I do things like shifting or more advanced or awkward techniques if the violin is not sort of being suspended out here for my hand to freely move around? Well, I have a video on that I will put in the description below. It's on specifically shifting, and learning to play holding the violin primarily in the left hand wakes up a lot of latent tactile stimulation and feedback that you would not get otherwise, as well as tending to have you engage the thumb a lot more, especially in terms of leveraging the fingers against the thumb, which is especially important for having a nice, good fourth finger sound. So to help you learn how to keep this quiet and hold the violin mostly in your left hand, there are a few things you can do. If you are using a shoulder rest, one of the best things you can do is place scales, and every time you do a shift, take your chin off the instrument. Just let the violin, because of the way the shoulder rest is shaped, it can kind of just sit here so you don't have to worry about it falling off. But just let it sit here and just play the scale with your chin off the instrument. It will force you, in that case, it will force you to engage your left hand more. Of course, at the end of the day, you actually do need some pressure, or at least stabilization, from your chin onto the chin rest to keep the violin from either falling off or going all over the place. So there has to be a balance between primarily holding the weight here and stabilizing, not holding, but stabilizing with the chin. So what you want to do instead of this, or having even just the tiniest little bit, because sometimes people raise the shoulder and you can't actually see it, but just having the tiniest little bit of tension here, you want to think of bringing the chin down to the violin instead of making sure that the violin doesn't come up to the chin. So, and this works whether you're using shoulder rest or not. Put the violin on the shoulder. Maybe once you've played a few goes without the chin on the violin, just make sure that you practice moving the chin down to the violin and playing a little bit, play those scales, play more with the awareness of the chin going down to the violin instead of sort of pinching it with the shoulder. It actually takes barely any skin friction of the chin onto the chin rest to stabilize the instrument. You don't need to squeeze it in place. So once you have the chin here, you're basically free to go. Also, there's one other thing I need to address in terms of learning to play in this manner, and that is that there are times where you might need to put a little bit of extra pressure on the chin rest if you're doing some particularly squirrely passages where you need to relieve some of the support of the instrument from the left hand. And the great thing about this style of playing is that you learn how to do that when necessary and only when necessary, so you're not keeping a constant tension on this part of your body. Now, you of course still shouldn't be raising this to hold the violin up when you need some of that extra support. You should still be just pinching with the chin down this way, and then only for a little bit. You learn how to do this, let it release, and then you go back to supporting it in the left hand, and that keeps away that constant tension, which keeps you from getting playing injuries. Now, one other side of this is developing a mind-muscle connection, but not a mind-muscle connection in terms of moving certain muscles, but of course in shutting these muscles off. We want these almost completely uninvolved in our violin playing. The problem is the trapezius is a big muscle, and big muscles like to take over things. So one good way to practice kind of turning this muscle off is get a small weight. What I have right here is a 5-pound weight plate. You might want to go a little bit smaller because we're not trying to build strength or muscle or anything like that here. We are trying to do a little bit of not physical therapy, but definitely mental connection to certain muscles. So what you want to do is do a lateral side raise with the weight, but you're going to do it very slowly. That's why you want a light weight. You want to do it very slowly, put the hand right here, and just make a connection to this muscle and just notice any twinge, because when you lift your arm this way, you are primarily trying to use the muscles in your shoulder here. These are called the deltoid muscles. That's what you want to use. However, because you are lifting in this motion, it's very easy to just get the tiniest bit of shrug in there to help support. And that is what you want to learn to make the mind-muscle connection to shut off. Sometimes it helps to kind of almost feel like you're stretching this way, pushing the muscle down while just lifting with these muscles here. That is a great way to teach yourself to not get these muscles involved and learn how to use these other muscles instead. So any little twinge of something in here, you want to stop the exercise, put everything back down, breathe into it, and try to lift it again. If you do it right, you should feel a giant stretch through here as well as through here. And this should feel almost like it's being pressed down into your rib cage. So just like that. Learning to do that is a great way to develop mind-muscle connection, which if you develop a mind-muscle connection in certain areas, which you can do through lifting weights and other things like that, it is really helpful in terms of avoiding playing injuries because you are more aware of all the muscles you're using and you're able to then optimize, turn certain ones off, turn certain ones on to be able to not get constant tension on certain muscles, which is where most of our playing injuries come from. Now let's move on to the other place that tends to be a problem for playing injuries, that being our forearms. Of course, the reasons for your injuries from this are much the same as from your trapezius muscle, except the problem, of course, becomes a little bit more complicated because you desperately do need these muscles to play, whereas the trapezius muscle, you just needed to get out of the way. Thankfully, these muscles at the very least are designed for more constant and precise movement. However, the main problem is not in, of course, using them all the time, it's in squeezing while playing. If you constantly feel like you're jamming your fingers into the strings in order to play, then what you need to learn to do is have a quick action on the string and then release it without destabilizing the finger so you don't lose any sound. To explain this a little bit further, the only time you need really a burst of energy from your hand that would cause that kind of immediate tension in your arm is when the finger touches the string. You can actually move your finger as slowly as you need to, and the moment it touches the string, so long as there is a bit of a oomph right there, then you're going to get a clear sound. But after you do this, you don't actually need to keep that constant pressure there. There just needs to be sort of a jump of pressure right there, a jolt of that, and then you can release it without, of course, releasing the entire string. But if you learn how to play this way with that just immediate sort of jaunt of pressure right at the beginning of the note and then sort of releasing of it, you will avoid a lot of pain here. So what is the best way of learning how to do this without just thinking, okay, I need to learn to release my finger every time I depress the string? Well, we need to go back to one of my favorite exercises, which I talked about in an earlier video on how to fix your intonation, Sevcik Op.1. Now, if you look at the Sevcik exercises, you will see that it is having you play these 4-note groupings, each with the same note value. So it just starts out very even. That's a little faster. A little faster, a little faster. But all of the note values are the same. All notes are the same length. So what I want you to do is practice this in sort of an exaggerated dotted rhythm. This is going to teach you to learn to release your hand a little bit. So you cannot play that way with sort of that quick ba-da if your tendency is to squeeze the hand on when you play. If you really want to learn how to do this properly, you're going to have to be super picky with yourself, or you can just hire me to be picky for you. But make sure whatever you do that your fingers move extraordinarily quickly as you can. No sluggishness at all. Go back and listen to what I did. It should sound at least like that, and every note be as clear as a bell. Another thing that can help you learn to not squeeze the violin so hard and cause constant tension here, which leads to tendinitis and carpal tunnel, is to learn to play more on the pads, this fatty part right here of the finger, rather than on the tip. Now, when we start playing, we kind of have to play on the tips because, especially as a little kid, that's the only way you can get any sort of a real clear sound. But just like we don't always forever keep our thumb on this part of the bow, but instead move it to here, even though a lot of us started with the thumb on this part of the bow, we need to learn to move our fingers from the tips of the fingers as we play to the pad. Now, the most obvious reason for this is that when you have to play on the tips of your fingers are more curved like this. However, if I was to play more on the pads of the fingers, my fingers have this curve to them. And this is much closer, if not exactly, the natural curve of your fingers when your hand is just relaxed. So your hand is already naturally prone to be in a more relaxed state, which means that you are not going to have this constant tension in your forearm. Now, to be clear, you're not actually playing right on the pad of the finger, which would be about on this spot of the finger right here. You're playing somewhere between the tip and the pad, usually about there. Another thing that can help alleviate constant tension in your forearm is to think in terms of finger action as a leverage against the thumb. So this is a little bit more easy to see if you're using a thumb position where the thumb is directly under the neck, but this also applies to other thumb positions as well. So if I hold the violin like this, I want to think in terms of leveraging the pressure of my fingers against the thumb, and sort of, obviously you don't want to use this large of a movement, but the movement of the fingers, the action of the fingers to the string, is kind of this sort of rotational motion from against my thumb. So the thumb goes up into the neck and this goes down. So it's really just doing this with the violin getting in the way. And this is especially important, like I said earlier, if you want to get a good leverage of your fourth finger. Doing this kind of action keeps you from having this kind of squeezing motion and feels much more natural and ergonomic. The more we take advantage of natural leverages in regards to our technique and use less sheer muscular force, the looser we will be and the less prone we will be to injuries from playing. Now, when it comes to the bow, because yes, you can get tendonitis in your bow arm from squeezing too hard, not as common, but it does happen. When it comes to the bow, it's a little bit more complicated, and honestly, there's not as much as I can do outside of a private lesson. But what I can give you are some suggestions that maybe will help you learn how to hold the bow in a little bit more efficient manner that you can start to apply to your own playing. Just like we want to release tension in our left hands, when it comes to holding the bow, we want to make sure we are holding it as lightly as possible and still being able to play without throwing it up in the air every time we do an up bow. Now, there are some exercises that can teach you how to develop a perfect balance between your grip and your flexibility. Unfortunately, those are a little bit too complicated to get into in this video. However, one principle I can give you is that you need to think of holding the bow primarily with the friction of your fingertips as opposed to actual just gripping. What this comes down to in a practical sense is just hold the bow as lightly as you can possibly get away with. If you have to be in a padded room just in case you drop the bow to teach yourself how to hold the bow lightly, then do it. It'll be worth it. Another thing that can help streamline and loosen up your bow technique is to think when you're adding pressure to the bow, make sure you're not actually feeling like you're pushing the bow in with your arm, but rather you are pronating. Now, pronating is the term that refers to turning a limb inwards towards the body, the rotation of a limb this way. The opposite this way is called supination. So when you want to add pressure to the bow stick, what you want to do is pronate the hand so the first finger is pushed into the bow. This way you can avoid, often what you'll see what people do is to get more sound into the string, they lift their arm a little bit and then push down instead of this nice streamlined rotational motion here. This reduces a whole lot of tension. Another thing that people tend to do is they, of course, like I said earlier, if they're going to push the bow down into the string, they want to lift their elbow up. Again, it's very difficult to lift the elbow up without getting that nasty trapezius muscle in the way. The trapezius muscle also causes a host load of bow problems as well. So you want to actually make sure that your arm, when you bow, sits at a comfortable level. It actually should be pretty low. You can play with your arm mostly down here and keep a nice straight bow. And not only that, but the basis of your bow arm is stable and loose. If you tend to have your elbow up too high, most of the time you are actually just building a whole lot of tension, which just goes through your whole arm and not only makes you have bad technique, but also creates playing injuries and problems. And that's it. Those are my technical suggestions for how to avoid playing injuries and general discomfort. Now remember, of course, you don't want to find excuses for not practicing. If you're having a little bit of discomfort, you want to make sure you know, well, is it just because I'm doing something new or is it because I'm actually hurting myself? You need to learn how to figure out what those feel like because you don't want to just stop practicing for no good reason. However, if you truly are suffering from some pain, then please take a break and get yourself worked out and then slowly work back into learning how to do good technique the way I described in this video, because you don't want to just keep practicing and practicing and practicing and then you just can't play anymore because you screwed yourself up too much. It has happened to people, and you know, you may think that you're pursuing excellence, but in reality you're just ending up being mediocre at the very end of it for all of your work, and there is no pleasure in mediocrity, is there? I've been Tobias Murphy for Murphy Music Academy. Happy safe practicing, and I'll see you next time.